Meeting's being called to order. The time is 7:07. Public portion of the meeting begins. The New Jersey Open Public Meeting Law was enacted to ensure the rights of the public to have advance notice of and to attend the meetings of public bodies at which any business affecting their interest is discussed or acted upon. In accordance with the provisions of this act, the business administrator, board secretary, has caused notice of this meeting to be published by having the date, time, and place thereof posted on the bulletin board of the municipal building, communicated to the Herald News, the Record, and filed with the clerk of the Borough of Hawthorne. Roll call, please.
Mr. Carr,
Here.
Ms. Goff,
Here.
Dr. Morell,
Here.
Mr. Palouse,
Here.
Mr. Reicher,
Here.
Mr. Totaro,
Here.
Mr. Turco,
Here.
Mr. Clavijo.
Here. Please join me for the flag salute. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the
United
States of America.
and to the republic
and
for
for
which
the
it stands,
Republic
stand
One nation,
God,
under God,
under God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
liberty
and
and
with
justice.
liberty
justice
and
for
justice for all.
Meeting regulations. During each regular meeting, 2 opportunities are provided for citizens to ask questions and to make comments. During the first opportunity, early in the agenda, the meeting is open to the public for the purpose of addressing items listed for approval on this agenda only. The second opportunity occurs just prior to adjournment, when citizens may address any subject matter that is pertinent to and/or directly related to the operation of the school district. If you wish to make a comment or ask a question during the public portion of the meeting, you may submit the question by accessing the Q&A feature on the bottom of the Zoom screen, or you may submit a question via our Board of Education email address at hawthorne.boe@hawthorne.k12.nj.us. When submitting questions via Zoom or email, please be sure to include your first and last name, address, and email address followed by your question. We will do our best to answer all questions in the order in which they are received. If for some reason we are unable to answer your question, someone from the district will respond using the email address you provided. The board asks that the members of the public be courteous and mindful of the rights of other individuals when speaking. Please note that the board will not respond to comments regarding students or board employees in light of the privacy rights held by those individuals. Moreover, the board discourages comments about such individuals and will not be responsible for such comments. Members of the public who choose to speak during this public session should carefully consider their comments, since they could be held personally liable for any statements they make. Finally, please note that in accordance with district policy, the board will not officially comment or respond to any matter mentioned unless it can confirm that the matter has first been brought to the attention of the appropriate school personnel in an attempt to resolve the issue. Public be heard. Agenda items only. Mr. Spirit, anything on the inbox?
No emails.
Okay, thank you. Nothing on the Q&A chat box either. That being the case, we're going to go ahead and close out the publicly heard part of the agenda. At this point, we're going to turn the floor to Mr. Fogarty. We thought it a good idea to put a refresher together for on the matter of ethics. It's something that we, as board members, upheld to maintain. There's, those of us that have been around a little longer than others, it can't hurt to get a refresher. And especially for the newer ones, this we just thought it would be of a value add for all of us here today. So thank you for coming out, and Steve, thank you for making yourself available. I will turn the floor over to you at this point.
Thank you, President Clavijo, and good evening to the members of the Hawthorne Board of Education. It's a privilege to be here with you tonight to provide you with your annual ethics training. It is an annual obligation that you must meet. It is in the form of professional advice and development with regard to your responsibilities as elected public officials. So I have a PowerPoint presentation, which I'm going to walk through, and I'm going to ask Mr. Spirito if he can share my screen or his screen with you. And I'm going to walk you through both the School Ethics Act and the Code of Ethics for School Board Members. Just by way of overview, the School Ethics Commission is actually the body that has jurisdiction and oversees the requirements under the School Ethics Act and the Code of Ethics for School Board Members. There are two distinct statutory requirements. One is the School Ethics Act, which deals with prohibited acts, and the other is the Code of Ethics for School Board Members. Now, with regard to the commission, the commission itself operates as a 9-member body. They have the jurisdiction to do a number of things. They issue advisory opinions. What's an advisory opinion? If you are concerned about a potential business conflict, if you are concerned that a relative of yours may prevent you from participating in contract negotiations, if you are concerned about a relationship, a business interest that you may have that may conflict with your elected duties, and you want to find out for certain whether or not you can act on a particular action, vote on it, participate in deliberations over it, you can ask the commission to give you an advisory opinion. They're very good about that. They're very timely about getting those opinions out to you. You essentially set forth the facts, ask them to advise you as to what you can and cannot do, and they will give you the advice that you need so that you stay within the guardrails of the School Ethics Act and the Code of Ethics for School Board Members. They also are the adjudicative body that receives complaints. Anyone can file a complaint against a school board member except the board itself. And that seems kind of counterintuitive, but when you think about it, we cannot file an ethics complaint as a board against one of our members. The only way that a complaint can be filed against one of our members is if it's filed by a third party or by a board member acting in his or her individual capacity. So arguably, if I'm on your board and you think that I have stepped out of line and I have committed an ethical violation, you could file a complaint against me, but as a private citizen, not as a member of the Hawthorne Board of Education. If there is a complaint filed, then the School Ethics Commission makes a finding preliminarily of probable cause. Probable cause means that based on all the facts, assuming they're all true, could there be a violation of the School Ethics Act or the Code of Ethics for School Board Members, then they will send it to the Office of Administrative Law for a hearing. Now, if the alleged violation is of the School Ethics Act, and this is an important distinction, then the School Ethics Commission is represented by the Attorney General's office, and a Deputy Attorney General will actually prosecute that complaint. Whereas if the violation that's alleged is of the Code of Ethics for School Board Members, then whoever files that complaint, the private citizen, the individual who files that complaint, has to prosecute that complaint on his own or her own against the board member. So let's move right into the prohibited acts. And what does the School Ethics Act prohibit? Conflicting interests. You cannot have a business interest or be involved in an activity or transaction that's in substantial conflict with your duties as a board member. What would that be, for example? You could not be on the board, you could not be a member of the Board of Trustees in a charter school that was competing for students from Hawthorne, essentially attracting students from Hawthorne into the charter school. You could not start up a not-for-profit company that advocates for educationally disabled students and then try to recruit clients in the Hawthorne School District. Those would be conflicting interests. You can't use your position to secure an unwarranted privilege or advantage or employment for yourself or other family members. What does that mean in simple terms? You can't ask the superintendent to hire a relative. You can't hand over a resume and say that a family member would like a position in the Hawthorne School District. And you can't profit from your board service. So, and you cannot, in your official capacity, have a direct or indirect financial interest in any business or organization that that contracts with the Hawthorne School District, if it would impair your objectivity or your independence of judgment. Also, you cannot act in your official capacity where there would be some personal involvement. So let's say, for example, that your child is going to be the subject of disciplinary action. You could not sit in on a executive session of the board. If your son or daughter was involved in a harassment, intimidation, and bullying investigation, you would have to recuse yourself from both the executive session and from voting on any of that. Again, you could not have a personal involvement that would create some benefit to you or a member of your immediate family. Conflicting employment would be the next area under the School Ethics Act that is prohibited. You cannot undertake any employment, whether it's compensated or not, which might reasonably be expected to prejudice your independence of judgment in the exercise of your official duties. Likewise, that would mean that you could not be employed independent in some capacity that is competing with the Hawthorne School District in some way. And not the same example, I would give you the same example of being involved in advocating and seeking clients in the area of special education, being involved in a charter school or a private school that was attempting to recruit or solicit students from your district into their school or their program. You can't solicit or accept any gift or favor, political contribution, promise of future employment. Obviously, no quid pro quo for gifts or favors as a board member. If you accept contributions to an election campaign where you are an announced candidate and you comply with the state's election laws, that would be an exception to this. That would not constitute a violation of the act. No self-dealing. So if you come upon information that you gain as a member of the board, information about an upcoming capital improvement project, information about upgrading of technology, you cannot use that information and pass it along to a member of your immediate family or any business or organization which you are associated with, to give that person or yourself a leg up where there would be some financial gain as a result of it. And you cannot act in any capacity that is adverse to your board. So you cannot represent an individual, you cannot represent a business organization before the board. You cannot take any position that would be adverse to the interests of the board, of the Hawthorne board as a whole. So what's permitted? Very little. Once you become an elected official of the board, there are very few benefits that can come your way without you transgressing the School Ethics Act. Insignificant benefits, no issue. Where there's no material or monetary gain. What does that mean in simple terms? It means that, you know, if you send your children to a private school, you get aid in lieu of transportation, no greater benefit than anybody else receives, then that's an insignificant benefit. There's no violation of the School Ethics Act. Inquiring for constituents, you have constituents that supported you in your election to the board. You want to inquire and get information for them. As long as you go about that in an appropriate way, either by requesting that information from the superintendent, filing an open public records request, as long as there's no fee, reward, anything of value, you can certainly do that without violating the School Ethics Act. And I said that you cannot advocate for a third party where the interest would be adverse to the board. That does not apply if you are representing yourself or an immediate family member as a parent, if you're advocating for your child, representing their interests. You have the right to do that, provided that you do not file a lawsuit against the school district. So let's say, for example, that you are advocating for your child in the gifted and talented program, or you're advocating for your child as a special education child, and you are going through the appeals process. You are entitled to do that. You have a right to do that without violating the School Ethics Act. But once you file a complaint against the board and you seek any kind of money damages, any kind of financial reimbursement, that becomes an irreconcilable conflict, and that would then constitute a conflicting interest, which would not be permitted. And you would have to make a decision at that point whether to advocate and pursue those claims, or to and resign from the board, or to abandon those claims and remain remain a member of the board. It is a conflicted interest that is irreconcilable. So separate and apart from the School Ethics Act, which deals only with prohibited acts, is the Code of Ethics for school board members. And the Code of Ethics for school board members are the provisions which are most often the subject of complaints against board members, most often the subject of published opinions by administrative law judges, the School Ethics Commission, and the Commissioner of Education. And I digress for just one moment, because while the School Ethics Commission transfers these cases to an administrative law judge, they are recommended decisions by the judge. They come back to the School Ethics Commission. School Ethics Commission decides whether to accept, reject, or modify the judge's decision, and they impose a penalty. There is the right of appeal to the Commissioner of Education, but only as to the penalty, not to the underlying finding that either the School Ethics Act or the Code of Ethics for school board members has been violated. So only where you feel that the penalty is too harsh, essentially that the penalty doesn't fit the crime, can you appeal that to the commissioner. So we have the Code of Ethics for school board members. And many of these are well known to you and really do not present challenges for most school board members. But enforcing the laws, abiding by board policies and regulations, hardly ever an issue. In terms of making decisions in terms of the educational welfare of students, hardly ever an issue. Not discriminating against any protected classes of students, and making those decisions so that they benefit the individual needs of all children, hardly ever an issue in terms of the conduct of board members and the complaints that we see being decided by the School Ethics Commission. However, the next one is an area where board members often act outside of the guardrails. And that is confining your action to policymaking, planning, and appraisal. To frame policies and plans only after the board has consulted with all who will be affected by them, which means you cannot act unilaterally. And the next provision of the School Ethics Act is also a provision where board members seem to blur the lines, that you will carry out your responsibility not to administer the schools, but with your fellow board members to see that they are well run. And so what does that mean? That means very simply that the responsibility for running the schools falls to the superintendent of schools. Your responsibility as a board is to evaluate your superintendent to make sure that the schools are being well run by the administration. We don't have the ability to, as a board or as board members, to take matters into our own hands. You know, we don't have the ability, if we go into the high school for a board meeting and we don't feel that the school has been properly maintained, that the floors are not clean, that there are no toiletries in the bathrooms. We don't have the ability to single out the buildings and grounds supervisor, or to take aside the custodian or the maintenance employee and direct him or her to clean the floors or to fill the canisters in the bathrooms. We have to go to the superintendent with those complaints. We don't have the ability, if the superintendent is recommending a reduction in force in the school district and gives you his reasons, we don't have the ability to go to a principal or to a supervisor to find out whether he or she agrees with the superintendent's recommendation. We don't have the ability to go outside of the board's deliberative process in order to gather information independent of the information that comes to us from the superintendent as part of either our executive discussion or our public action. Again, the hallmark of this provision is that we make sure the schools are well run. We do not run the schools. Recognize that authority rests with the Board of Education, that you cannot make any personal promises or take any private action. The personal promises, not so much a problem in terms of board members, again, staying within the guardrails, but private action that may compromise the board. So when would that happen? Private action that could compromise the board. Let's say that you were dissatisfied with the services being provided by a particular vendor. You weren't happy with the food service management company. Maybe you weren't happy with some of your professional services, and maybe you weren't happy with the answers that you were getting from the administration. You don't have the ability to undertake private action. You don't have the ability to call other food service management companies and get proposals. You don't have the ability to call another architect or another engineer. Maybe it's somebody that you know. Maybe it's, maybe you think that what you're doing will ultimately benefit the board. It doesn't matter what your motivation is. It doesn't matter whether this is well-meaning. It doesn't matter that it is that it is done with what you believe to be the best interests of the school district. You cannot take private action because it has the potential to compromise the board. And so there's a case that really, I think, kind of brings this home for us. There's a case in which a board member was concerned because of state aid reductions, concerned that there were going to have to be reductions in staff, that it was going to be difficult in order to meet the financial commitments in the board's budget. And he felt that he had many business contacts in the community, that he was somebody that could solicit for contributions and funds to the school district. So he took it upon himself to send out letters to all of the businesses in the community, basically set up something on social media, asking for donations to be made to the Board of Education. All of that seemed quite laudatory. All of that seemed pretty, something that would benefit the school district. And yet somebody filed an ethics complaint against them. And what the School Ethics Commission said was that was private action that could compromise the board. It does not matter what the ultimate end game is of that action. If it is private action that has not been authorized by the board, it is a violation of this provision of the Code of Ethics for school board members. You'll not surrender your independent judgment to special interests or partisan political groups, to use the schools for personal gain or friends. Do not see much of that as being the subject of many ethics complaints either. However, the next provision is often the subject of ethics complaints, and often, unfortunately, a provision that board members have been found to have violated, and that is the issue of confidentiality. So this provision says that you will hold confidential all matters pertaining to the schools, which, if disclosed, would needlessly injure individuals or the schools, and that in all other matters you will provide accurate information. And what does that mean? That means that if you are going to discuss something, something of and about the Hawthorne School District, and it is not confidential. So now you're talking about the budget preparation. You are talking about a public action proposing to take some action which will affect your schools, perhaps a redistricting, perhaps a reduction in force. You have to provide factual information. It has to be accurate. And if it is determined that you knew it was inaccurate when you provided it, or that you did it with reckless disregard for its truth or falsity, that would be a violation of this provision of the School Ethics Act, of the Code of Ethics. Confidentiality. There's a discussion in executive session about a staff member, about students, about safety and security, about contract negotiations, about any of those exceptions to the Open Public Meetings Act, which allow you to have closed confidential discussions. If those matters are disclosed to a third party, that would be a violation of this provision of the Code of Ethics, not only because you have disclosed confidential information, but because you have taken private action which could prejudice the board. And the disclosure of that confidential information, if it involved a student, then arguably it would be a violation of federal law in terms of the student's federally protected privacy rights, or if it involved a staff member, it would potentially be an invasion of privacy. What comes with that is the potential for litigation and regrettably the potential for the board to have to respond in damages. You'll vote to appoint the best qualified personnel available after consideration of the recommendation of the superintendent. Doesn't mean that you can't reject that recommendation. Doesn't mean that you have to accept every recommendation that comes to you. But what it does mean is that your decision not to accept the recommendation cannot be for some arbitrary or capricious reason. It cannot be because you know that the individual is going to receive tenure and that you're not a proponent or you are philosophically opposed to the granting of tenure. It cannot be because you thought somebody else might be applying for the position and you reject that recommendation, forcing the superintendent to go back to the well in order to bring forth another candidate. Again, you do not have to accept that recommendation, but there has got to be a legitimate reason why you are not accepting that recommendation. You will support and protect school personnel in the proper performance of their duties. Simply put, what that means is that you cannot disparage members of the school community, school personnel, the administration, or teaching staff members. You cannot disparage them, impugn their reputations, speak about them in a way that would be disrespectful or publicly critical of their performance. If you want to speak about school personnel and it is a legitimate discussion to have, they're given rights notice. You have the ability then to talk about them in executive session. And if they waive their privacy rights, then obviously that discussion would be held in public. All complaints, no matter who the complainant is, no matter where that complaint is received, no matter what the source of the complaint is, it's got to be referred to the superintendent. We cannot act on it as individual board members or as a board. Your responsibility when that complaint comes to you, whether it's on the soccer field, or it's in the grocery store, or it's while you're walking your dog in Gothelbrook Park and somebody approaches you. It doesn't matter. Wherever that complaint comes from, that complaint must go to the superintendent. Even at a board meeting, if the public is storming the Bastille about something and they are adamant and passionate about what they want you to do as a board, and even though you may be moved to do it, you cannot take public action until after the superintendent has weighed in on whatever that complaint is. So here's the kind of abbreviated list of pitfalls to avoid. Always refer the complaints to the superintendent. We've just gone over that. I want to emphasize it again. Your role is to frame policies and plans after you have consulted with those who will be affected by them. And who will that be? That will be your stakeholders. That's why you have standing committees. You frame those policies and plans only after you've had an opportunity to confer with the administration, the staff, other members of the community. And as standing committees, you have the ability to invite others in who may have information or can speak to you about the policies or plans that you're contemplating. Don't give orders to staff members, and it doesn't matter who they are. Don't direct members of the staff to do anything. As a board member, you have no authority to do that. That directive can only come from the superintendent. And if you believe that the superintendent should give that directive, the person to whom you give that directive is the superintendent. Don't refer friends, relatives for employment. You can certainly tell somebody to contact the superintendent. You can certainly pass along a resume to the superintendent, but you want to be very careful that you don't blur the lines here in terms of using your position in order to gain an unwarranted advantage. And remember that the term is for friends or others. So this is not just your immediate family. It would also extend to you using your position in order to gain an advantage for friends or others. You have an issue with a board policy, procedures, curriculum. You refer to the superintendent for action. Superintendent's responsibility is then to research that issue and to report back to the board. Direct contact with non-central office staff could be viewed as extending beyond your policy making, planning, and appraisal, and would likely violate that provision of the Code of Ethics, which says that you are not to administer the schools, only to make sure that they are well run. So again, I want to emphasize that direct contact with non-central office staff can be viewed as extending beyond your policy, planning, and appraisal role as board members. So when you make those calls to a non-central staff member, you should be doing it as a parent or as a guardian with regard to your child. You should not be doing that as a board member who is gathering information or is having a discussion about the business of the board. So sometimes I think it's helpful to take some of that and put it in the context of some of the cases that have involved school board members over the course of the last year. You know, what have they done right? What have they done wrong? What are the lessons learned? So you have this case coming out of the Madison School District, and this is a case that was filed by that was filed by a staff member against the board president. This staff member alleged that the board president was using her position to get preferential treatment for her children. And he also alleged that because there came a time when he alleges he wouldn't that he wouldn't do her bidding, that he wouldn't concede to what she was asking, that he was up for renewal. His contract was up for renewal by the board, and he alleges that the board president basically torpedoed his renewal by influencing the superintendent to non-renew his contract. And so ultimately what the School Ethics Commission determined was that there was no evidence that this board member, the board president, had done anything other than to advocate for her children. And that while they got into a dispute over whether or not her children were receiving the appropriate program and services, she never attempted to use her position as a board member or as a board president in order to obtain those services. And while it was clear that they didn't get along with each other, and while it was clear that that their relationship was a rocky one, there was also no evidence that the reasons for the superintendent's decision to non-renew the employee had anything to do with the board president. They were based on negative evaluation, negative observations and evaluation performance determinations over the course of that year. So again, this is a case in which the School Ethics Commission found no probable cause, dismissed the complaint, and found that this board president was appropriately advocating for her children She was not suing the school district. She had not crossed the line, had not used her position to gain an unwarranted advantage. Now, this case out of Randolph Township, this was a case in which a board member during board member comments was highly critical about an advocacy group, and that was very critical of the board's actions. So parents in Randolph had formed this advocacy group. They were coming before the board. They were very critical of what the board was doing. One of the board members had reached a point where where he could take it no more. And during board member comments, he lambasted this advocacy group. And they turned around and they filed an ethics complaint against him. And what they were claiming is that he had used his position, his bully pulpit, to get a personal benefit, and that his remarks about this advocacy group were contrary to the educational welfare of children. And what the School Ethics Commission said is that no, this board member during board member comments made comments that were fair comment and criticism. There was no, that the board member made the remarks about this advocacy group. There was no violation of the School Ethics Act or the Code of Ethics for school board members. So you can see that as a board member, and what I would emphasize to you here is that if you are going to make statements of and about matters coming before the board, you want to make those statements during a duly constituted board meeting, rather than to be making those comments privately. Because if you make those comments during a duly constituted board meeting, then for the most part, you do it with the protection that is afforded to you as public officials who are acting in the course and scope of your elected duties. And also, if you're going to make statements outside of a duly constituted board meeting, you've got a responsibility under the Code of Ethics for school board members to self-identify. So if you're going to write a letter to the editor, if you're going to post something on social media, which I am never a proponent of, by the way, posting anything on social media as board members, because I think that it is a trap for the unwary for two reasons. One, you could be violating the social media policy of your own board, but more importantly, you have to self-identify. So if you're going to post something on social media of and about school board business, you have an obligation to say, I am Stephen Fogarty. I am a member of the Hawthorne Board of Education, and what I'm about to say has neither been authorized or approved by the Board of Education. It is my own personal private comment. So you've got to do all of that before you post on social media, before you write a letter to the editor, before you give a statement to the press. In this case, board member did it during board member comments, did it with impunity. And so the takeaway here is, if you have something to say, you are far better off saying it while you are cloaked with the protection of an elected official at a duly constituted meeting. This is a case out of Mount Lakes. Here, a board member made some very harsh statements about hearing impaired children that were attending the Lake Drive School for the Deaf, which is one of the schools that comprise the Mountain Lake School District. And he made some statements indicating that those students were responsible for a large number of disciplinary problems and HIV-related cases. Now, you know that from what I said to you at the outset, that we have an obligation under the Code of Ethics for school board members to ensure that that our schools meet all of the individual needs of all children regarding of their ability, race, creed, sex, or social standing. The argument that was being made here is that this board member made those statements in violation of that provision. And basically what the School Ethics Commission said was that these statements were insensitive. They may have been inappropriate. They certainly may have been offensive, but they were not violations of the Code of Ethics. And what is emphasized here, by the way, and you'll often see this in these cases with the School Ethics Commission, is that they are quick to point out that they are not the civility police. So if board members act inappropriately at a board meeting, it may not be a violation of the School Ethics Act or the Code of Ethics for school board members. And if it is not, then the board has the ability to sanction its own board members, but boards can only sanction their own board members if the conduct that they are addressing is not a violation of the Code of Ethics. If it's a violation of the Code of Ethics, our board can do nothing about a board member's conduct because they have exclusive jurisdiction over that. We could take action to sanction one of our board members. In this situation, the Mountain Lakes Board of Education could have sanctioned this board member for his actions because the School Ethics Commission did not have jurisdiction. So here's a board member who's on the policy committee. Her son is an athlete. She goes to the baseball games. There's somebody there that is really making her very unhappy because he's a little bit too enthusiastic for her taste. You know, he's loud. You know, he's often over the top. He's critical of the athletes. He's critical of the umpires. And so as a member of the policy committee, she suggests that there should be a policy that would give the board the authority to remove someone who posed a disturbance at a school event. And so this enthusiastic individual heard about the board member authoring or recommending this policy, and he filed an ethics complaint against her. And he alleged that she was using her position to gain some kind of a personal advantage. Suffice it to say that the School Ethics Commission found that this board member was a member of the policy committee. She was tasked with the very conduct that served as the basis of the complaint. It was dismissed, not taken seriously at all. But you can see that these ethics complaints can often be used as a sword by someone who is unhappy with one of us because of some action we've taken, even where it's done legitimately in the course and scope of our professional responsibilities. Fortunately, when that happens, you are indemnified. You are entitled to be represented by me or by an attorney appointed by the insurance carrier because you are this action is being brought against you for something that happens in the course and scope of your elected duties. So this is a board member that was not quite as fortunate. So in this case, a board member was found to have violated the Code of Ethics for school board members when he inadvertently copied a parent and a teacher in the district on a confidential email. So imagine this was a situation where there was a teacher in the school district who was also a parent. She was unhappy about the way that the superintendent had handled her complaint. And apparently this board member was sympathetic to this parent. And this board member sent out an email to the board president, which contained confidential information about the parent's child, about the complaint that was filed, about the board's deliberations, how the board had handled the complaint in executive session. And of course, he made the mistake that makes your eyes wide open, and that is reply all. So that confidential memo went from the board member to also the parent teacher who had filed the complaint in that matter, even though it was inadvertent. It doesn't matter. The inadvertence goes to the penalty. It doesn't go to the violation. Even an innocent disclosure of confidential information that comes to you or that you hear about will be a violation of the Code of Ethics. The consequence or the punishment may very well be mitigated if you can establish that it was inadvertent, unintended, but the violation still exists. And if that happens, unfortunately, you're going to find yourself on one of these slides that I present to boards all over the state. So this was a case where the acting superintendent filed a ethics complaint against a board member who apparently was hammering the acting superintendent at a board meeting. And I mean hammering in terms of figuratively, not literally, pounding him with questions. He was unprepared to answer them. It went from bad to worse. He was embarrassed. He filed a complaint against the board member. He was alleging that the board member was not supporting him. As you have heard me say, we must support the personnel in the school district. He also complained that there were statements about him on social media. And ultimately, the School Ethics Commission said, no, this was not a violation. This was not a situation in which the board member was not supporting the superintendent. He was asking him questions. The fact was that the superintendent was not able to answer those questions. And if he was not able to answer the questions, it was acknowledged that he became frustrated, maybe even embarrassed at that public meeting, but the questions were legitimate questions. Now, interestingly enough, what you see here, and you hardly ever see this when a complaint is filed. Very often, when a complaint is filed, the board member who is on the other side of this complaint will not only defend against the complaint, but he will allege that the complaint, or she will allege that the complaint is frivolous. And the School Ethics Commission, if they find the complaint to be frivolous, can impose a fine. They found this complaint by this acting superintendent against the Bloomingdale Board of Education to be frivolous, and they fined him $100. So the conduct of this board member, and this is out of the Lodi School District, the conduct of this board member pretty much checks off all the boxes in terms of violation of the Code of Ethics. So it's instructive for us because he used his blog to relentlessly attack the complainant, who was a preschool teacher employed by the Lodi School District, was a member of the association's negotiations committee. And obviously they were at loggerheads over negotiations, over grievances, over over a host of things. So first of all, he posted inaccurate and misleading information about contract negotiations and her salary. So posting of inaccurate information is itself a violation of the Code of Ethics. If the information is not confidential, and one would assume here that this information was not confidential, that the negotiations were concluded, but the information he posted about her was inaccurate, that was a violation. He referred to her in a negative manner on his blog by questioning her honesty, referred to her as Debbie Downer, claimed that she did not put children first, called her greedy, explicative, deleted, called her a bully, a union bully, claimed that she had an irrational obsession with liberal politicians, and said she was all about attention seeking and feeling relevant. That too, the questioning of her honesty. Clearly, he violated the Code of Ethics because he did not support her as a member of the school district personnel. He depicted a picture of the street where she lived. He undermined her credibility with the members of the association by suggesting that she did not want to resolve contract negotiations. He also questioned her qualifications. So you can see that this board member checked off all the boxes on social media by violating all these provisions of the Code of Ethics. And ultimately, what the School Ethics Commission concluded was that that this individual should be suspended. And I believe that ultimately the suspension was for 30 days from the board. And by the way, in terms of what action can the School Ethics Commission take, they can issue a private reprimand, which nobody knows about. They feel that whatever you did, you may have done innocently or inadvertently, so they admonish you privately, and that's never made public. They can issue a public reprimand, and that becomes a matter of public record. They can suspend you from the board for a period of time. That also becomes a public record, and that is unfortunately not something that can ever be expunged, not something that ever goes away. These decisions remain on the website. If you were to Google Mr. Curioni, I am sure that this decision would pop up as part of your Google search. The next case, the case out of South Orange Maplewood. And this is a case where a board member was pulled over by a police officer, routine traffic stop. She attempted to use her position as a board member to discourage the issuance of a summons. When the police officer would have none of it, she ratcheted things up. She not only tried to use her position in order to avoid the issuance of that summons, but she then aggravated the situation by using offensive and insulting language toward the police officer, racial epithets and the like. And the SEC found that she had attempted to use her position in order to gain an unwarranted advantage, and that she also took public action that could potentially prejudice the board. Also, by using those racial epithets, it was pretty clear that she was not taking action in the best interests of all children in that school district. The SEC, the commission, recommended a 6-month suspension. She appealed to the commissioner. Commissioner felt 6 months was too harsh. He reduced the penalty to 30 days. Again, what that points up is what I said to you earlier, that you can appeal to the commissioner, not the underlying finding. She violated the code of ethics for school board members, but you can appeal the penalty, which is what happened here. It's a case out of Hohokus. Hohokus had a second question to increase the tax levy in order to construct a STEM laboratory in one of its schools. This was a board member that was in support of that referendum. There was a local grassroots organization also supporting the referendum, and she posted something on Facebook indicating where you could pick up or drop off signage to put on your front lawn. She was alleged here to have violated the code of ethics for school board members, taking private action that could prejudice the board, taking political action, not self-identifying on her Facebook page. The School Ethics Commission found that none of this was private action prejudicing the board. She was acting as an individual. What she was posting on Facebook was simply how you could pick up and drop off a sign. She was not proselytizing. She was not a proponent of the bond referendum. And what they also found is where she was posting something on Facebook recommending that people vote in favor of the referendum, that she did self-identify. And she did say that she was on social media, on her Facebook post, she indicated that all of those statements she was making in support of that referendum, she was making as a private citizen. So keep that in mind if you are posting anything on social media with regard to board business. And again, with regard to board business. So board member sits in an executive session. A student comes before you. Recommendation is for more than a 10-day suspension. There's a board level hearing. This board member in West Windsor, Plainsboro, was found to have violated the confidentiality provisions of the Code of Ethics for school board members because he forwarded an email message to members of his immediate family about the student who was subjected to that disciplinary action, and members of his immediate family shared that information with countless others. So what did that do? Clearly, that violated the student's privacy rights, potentially violated federal and state law with regard to the student's rights that we are reposed with an obligation to protect, ran the risk that the board could be subjected to liability and money damages. Clearly, that was a violation of the Code of Ethics, requiring absolute fidelity with what you discuss in executive session. Earth Amboy. So this was a situation where a board member, again, took private action that could prejudice the board, also took private action, which undermined the authority of the superintendent, did not support the superintendent in the performance of his duties. There was a union meeting to discuss the superintendent. More importantly, there was a union meeting to talk about the superintendent's shortcomings. And this board member was invited by the union to attend. And the board member attended without board authority, decided that he would go and just hear what they had to say, that what would be the harm, finding out what the concerns are about his superintendent. He would then take that information back to the board. The problem is that his attendance seemed to be in support of the union's complaints about the superintendent. So his actions constituted both administering the schools by meeting with third parties, hearing their complaints, taking private action beyond the scope of his duties, and had the potential to compromise the board. 60-day suspension was originally imposed, but the School Ethics Commission found this conduct to be so outrageous that they imposed a one-year suspension, suspended this board member for 1 year from the board. He appealed to the commissioner, had the penalty reduced to 2 months. Rude comments from a board member to a member of the public. It's a case out of Willingboro. And these comments to a member of the public, this was somebody who got up at the podium, somebody that wanted to make comments, public comments about the board, and perhaps perhaps they were comments that were unflattering. Perhaps they were off-putting to members of the board. The board member was upset. Made pretty awful remarks to the speaker. It became pretty rancorous and contentious at the board meeting. But again, ultimately, the School Ethics Commission found that there was no disclosure of confidential information. His comments were not made on behalf of a special interest group. He did not attempt to take on a complaint without forwarding it to the superintendent first. And there was nothing to indicate that he exceeded his authority. Again, they're not the civility police. As impolite and rude as those comments may have been, they are not going to be a violation unless those comments also have a nexus to one of these Code of Ethics requirements, to one of these prohibited acts. Questions from you with regard to either the prohibited acts or the Code of Ethics for school board members? There's certainly enough for you to think about there.
Steve, would you be able to make comments on best practices for email?
So a couple of things with regard to email. You have the ability to send an email to each other. But what you want to be careful of is that once you start sending emails to one another, once there is a quorum of the board, so once there are 5 board members which are exchanging emails about about board business, you not only run the risk of violating the code of ethics for school board members, but it is also potentially a violation of the Open Public Meetings Act. The Open Public Meetings Act is why we're here, why we're in public. We come together as a board to discuss board business. Board business should really not be discussed outside of the board unless it's done through the committee structure. And if we are communicating with each other by email or texting or social media, and there is a quorum of the board that's engaged in that conversation, that is potentially an Open Public Meetings Act violation. And the bigger concern with that, and I think seldom, and I think is not often realized by board members, is that a violation of the Open Public Meetings Act falls to the jurisdiction of the Passaic County Prosecutor's Office. So it's not a code of ethics violation only, it is also potentially a violation of the law, because we are violating the civil rights law, which actually controls the conduct of board meetings.
Thank you.
And do not hit reply all, because that inadvertence reply all, you have, by doing that, arguably, you have communicated with a majority of the board. You've communicated with a quorum of the board. And so board members, generally, we say, you know what, there are a couple of simple things that you ought to do. Do not reply. This is informational only. Make sure that you're not soliciting a response. So again, it's a trap for the unwary. You should avoid it whenever possible. Any other questions? By the way, unfortunately, all these cases that I've shown you tonight, it just seems that there have been more cases that have been filed and adjudicated before the School Ethics Commission over the course of this pandemic than I have seen in my entire career. So I think that's probably a product of a lot of things, not the least of which we are doing so many things virtually. And I think also that board members, because they are home, have more time to deal with the business of the board. And I think in doing that, they often forget what those guardrails are. Any other questions for me? Well, you're good for a year.
Thanks, Steve.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Steve.
You bet.
Thank you, Mr. Fogarty.
My pleasure.
Let me just open the agenda once again. At this moment, we're moving on with the agenda. Public be heard. As a reminder, when submitting questions or comments via email, please be sure to include your first and last name, address, and your question. Mr. Spirito, do you have anything in the inbox, please?
Not have any emails, no.
Okay. Thank you. I don't see anything in the chat. We'll give it a chance. Okay, seeing nothing, we'll go ahead and close out the public be heard portion of that meeting. We will be moving on to private session. We all received a separate link for that executive session. Be resolved that the Hawthorne Board of Education convenes an executive session to discuss exempt matters pertaining to personnel. Be it further resolved that it is anticipated the executive session will be for about 15 minutes in duration and that public action may not be taken. Be it further resolved that the minutes of the executive session will be made available upon a determination by the board that the disclosure of the minutes will not detrimentally affect any right or interest of the board and the need for confidentiality no longer exists. Can we have a motion, please?
Motion.
Second.
Discussion? Roll call.
Mr. Carr,
Yes.
Ms. Goff,
Yes.
Dr. Morel,
Yes.
Mr. Palouche,
Yes.
Mr. Reicher,
Yes.
Mr. Totaro,
Yes.
Mr. Turco,
Yes.
Mr. Clavijo.
Yes. So Tamer, we're logging off at this point, right? And logging in through the executive one?
Yes, that's correct. You'll log off this meeting, log on to the executive session, and then once you've completed the executive session, you'll return to this meeting to close out the public meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're good, right?
Yes, everyone is here.
Thank you. A motion to adjourn, please?
Motion.
Discussion? Roll
I'm
call?
so- I didn't
Mhm.
hear I didn't hear it. I'm sorry.
I moved it, Trudy.
Thank you. And who's second?
Second.
Thank you.
Question? Roll call, please.
Mr. Carr,
Yes.
Ms. Goff,
Yes.
Dr. Morel,
Yes.
Mr. Palouche,
Yes.
Mr. Reicher,
Yes.
Mr. Totaro,
Yes.
Mr. Turco,
Yes.
Mr. Clavijo.
Yes. Thank you all. See
Stay
some-
safe, everyone.
Have a great
see some
evening.
Tomorrow
Good
night.
night.
Bye, everybody.
At this next